had to have been 14.
Really?
I think that kid, and Barry somebody played the original kid, and I see him. He was part of the Barry, he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, or vice president of the not Livingston, but Barry somebody, and I think he was around the Screen Actors Guild when things kind of went sideways there for a while, and people were stealing money, and a bunch of shit was going on at the Screen Actors Guild. It seemed to me about 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, good. Jason Robards did the film with Sandy
Dennis.
Yeah. And William Daniels is in it.
William
Barbara
Daniels,
Harris,
right. And Marty Balsam too, isn't that?
Is his brother? Yeah. And it's got one of the great lines in movies. In the middle of all the running around, etc., the phone rings. And Murray picks it up and says, "Hello, is this someone with good news or money?" "It is. Goodbye," and hangs up. And there's no explanation for what the call was or anything, but that great line of it, "Is this somebody with good news or money?" "Well, it isn't. Goodbye." Hangs up on him. I held on to that one. I've used it myself.
I love that. So in the play, every morning he gets up and he has a conversation with the weather, that weather recording, and he has a whole conversation with the recording. What do you say? "Oh, sunny and 73 degrees. Okay." And then he opens up the window. "Hello, New York. It's going to be 73 degrees and sunny." And he
"Come on, all you people, get out of your house. Go to your work now. Let's get going." He starts talking to the world.
It was great. It was great.
Was that
a wonderful, wonderful movie?
Do you know Jim, who wrote that play?
Oh boy, that was
God, I'm trying to think.
Really good that I
Herb
stumped
Gardner.
both of you.
Herb Gardner.
There you go. Good for you, man. That's
I know
right.
Herb something. Yeah.
Yeah. You knew it was Herb something, didn't you, Jim?
Gardner.
Yeah.
I was going to say Herb Ross, but I knew that wasn't true.
Right. We're kind of on the clock now. So, Jim, just why don't you? Because I'm not very good at like doing the research and stuff. Jim was on the Stanford debate team, but he wasn't.
Wow. I was on the debate team in high school that got me into Stanford. And once I got into Stanford, I said, "No more debate."
All right. Well, he was he was the research guy. He was the guy who did all the research, and then there were people like me that came out and fucking performed. Took all the credit for
they would mouth my words. Yeah. I can see them doing it.
So I asked Jim just so anybody who's listening to this might have an idea of what your background is. So I just asked him to do a quick Wikipedia page search and have him mention this. Okay, Rico?
Sure.
Okay, so go ahead, Jim.
Well, I mean, what really comes across is what a man of 1,000 fields you are, with a very accomplished and renowned cardiologist, and yet you've got this list of acting credits that's pretty astounding too. And you were a graduate of New York University and received a John Parks History Award. How did that come about? I'm curious. So, where does that fit into this picture? So, what
is that award?
Well, I'll tell you. So when I went to NYU, I knew I wanted to be pre-med. I was on a scholarship, an NYU scholar, and most pre-meds, they pick history, biology, and ology to be their major. And I said, that's nonsense, because I'm going to do all that in med school. I want to, pick a subject that's kind of interesting and not science. And I remember my first choice was journalism, and I took a reporting 1 class with this guy, William Burroughs. I can't never forget it. And it was a summer class just before the year started, and it was like when those summers in New York was 100 degrees and muggy, and they didn't believe in air conditioning, and we all had to use Olivetta manual typewriters with erasable bond. And I was like, wait a second, why are we using erasable bond typewriters? Whatever happened to? He goes, well, what if you're in Guatemala covering a revolution and there's no electricity? How are you going to write the story? This is how you're going to write the story. And so we did this. Reporting 1, I remember first day of class, he played the telephone game where we told the first guy in the first row this whole story, outside in the hallway for like 10 minutes, and they go around the room and they get to me. I'm the last guy in the last row, and then they get to me, and this guy, I go, so what happened? And the guy goes, some lady broke her hip. I'm like, that can't be what happened. He was out there for 10 minutes with that other guy. There's got to be more to it. So I went to the first guy. Hey, what did he tell you? So I get the whole story. And then come time, the guy comes back from his little break, a cigarette break, actually, it turns out to be. And he says, okay, now I'm going to show you about source material and news. It goes, what's your name? Rico Simonini. Good, Rico, come on up here and tell us what the story was. And I tell this whole story about this lady was mugged and tried to chase and get her purse back, and then this cab driven by terrorists cut her off, and she broke her hip, but then again they crashed to a fire hydrant. I had this whole story, and the whole class is like, what's going on? And he goes, wait a second, where'd you get that story from? I go, well, this girl in front of me told me the story about a lady breaking a hip. That didn't make sense. But so I figure I go to the guy up front that you told the story. I got the scoop from him. And he looks at me and goes, I've done this for 30 years. You're the first guy to screw it up. And I was like, I guess I'm not going to major in journalism. But so I became a history major, and I liked history because it was it's about learning, understanding your past informs you on your present and hopefully your future. Although it seems to be we keep making mistakes over and over again, so maybe humans are just flawed. But yeah, I liked history. I liked American history, and I focused on two major theses that I wrote, and I like writing too. I guess you get to read 20 books and write something, so it's like making an argument. And the two things I wrote about was one about the Red Scare, and how in the
McCarthy.
McCarthy, but also in the 1920s, 1918, John
Reed.
The
Palmer raids.
Exactly, Mitchell Palmer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there was a movie, Reds.
Yeah,
that was out.
That's a wonderful movie. The Warren Beatty movie?
Correct.
Yeah,
one of my favorite movies. Warren wrote
Stapleton.
it, directed it. Oh, my God. And that was about the Reds. That was about John Reed, Louis Bryant, in the village.
Emma Goldman.
At the time of the Russian Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution. So I wrote about that and xenophobia in America and how that keeps as a recurring theme. And then the second thing I wrote about, which was inspired by this, he called himself a church-bombing Northern Irish man. He goes, you went to a Jesuit high school in Manhattan. I went to Xavier. He goes, I want you to write something real about the Jesuits, not this kind of like glory of God crap. I want you to tell about who these guys really were. And what I researched, actually was how the Jesuits were kind of like this facilitator for the conquest of South America and the colonization of Japan, and they actually, facilitated the subjugation of these native people in South America. And basically, hey, give us money, build a church. This is our God. Otherwise, we're gonna, crush you and kill you. And and in Japan, they tried the same thing, except the Japanese were a little more sophisticated, and they at one point got rid of everybody. They excluded all the Westerners after they were betrayed or bamboozled by the Jesuits and the Spaniards trying to colonize. So they wrote this really saucy paper, and that got me the award, which was it's the highest honor they give every history graduate at NYU. I think they give it every 2 years. And they were like, "Hey, congratulations! I had no idea the award existed." And I just get this letter. Hey, you were nominated for an award. Hey, you won the award. And you're supposed to get money for a scholarship towards graduate studies in history. And he goes, "So what are you gonna do with your award?" I go, "Well, I'm actually going to medical school." And the runner-up, I see him crying. "What do you mean you're going to medical school? I lost to you, man. You can't go to medical school." It's like, well, I mean, can I give him the money? No, it doesn't work that way. Well, sorry, guy. But,
God, when you mentioned the history of the Jesuits, the image that popped into my mind was that Roland Joffe movie, The Mission.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. That just popped right into my mind.
Exactly. So just to show, I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And the church is not immune from that, from having power and wealth and trying to abuse that.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course I showed one of the priests at my former high school, and I said, "Look what I wrote." He goes, "They would have burned you at the stake if you had shown this." I go, "Well, good thing I don't live in the 16th century." But yeah, and this priest had given me all these books to read, and some were in Latin. So at the time, I had taken Latin, so I could kind of go through it. And I was able to find enough juice, you could kind of read through,
Can you explain to me what I said in Tombstone?
Yes, behold the pale horse. Yes, that was great.
Okay, so you won the scholarship. You were not even in med school yet at that point. You were graduating from New York. They say something about, where'd you go to high school?
So at the Xavier High School in
why
Manhattan,
why on Wikipedia does it say that you survived? Do you know why it says
I survived a Jesuit education?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So when I went to my high school, I maybe someone may have broken this record, but I led my high school in grade point average and in number of days in detention at the same time.
Oh, you were that guy. The other two in days of detention also.
So I always had this way of. So for example, I enrolled in Italian, and they said, "Oh, you have to take Italian 1." I go, "Why? I speak Italian at home." Well, you have to start with the first level of Italian. So I'm in the class with a bunch of guys that really don't speak Italian, and I was fluent, but with this Naples dialect. So to give you an idea, the Naples dialect is kind of like a Brooklyn accent for Italy. So whenever they hear the Naples dialect, they figure you're going to rob them, you're going to beat them up or something. It's got the same connotation, the same. So I'm sitting there, and the priest was this guy from northern Italy, from actually Trieste, which Trieste has exchanged hands, gone from Italy to Yugoslavia to So he spoke like 7 languages. This guy was like a really badass, so to speak. But he's also a perfectionist with grammar, enunciation, pronunciation. So every time I would speak to him in Italian, he would say back to me, he says, you sound like a fishmonger selling like salmon on the streets of Naples.
This is your teacher?
My teacher.
Yeah.
And I would flip back at him something in Italian saying, well, who are you northern Italian, whatever. And then we get into this whole banter. Next thing you know, detention, go. And the whole class like, what just happened? I go, I guess I'm going to detention for not speaking Italian well enough, even though no one in the class knew what the heck we were saying. So this happened repeatedly in every class I would go to.
Excuse me, Rico, Jim, didn't you get sent to, weren't you reading something behind a book in class?
The one time I went to detention was I got caught reading a book in algebra. I got caught reading In Cold Blood in algebra class.
They sent him to detention for that.
Yeah, and they sent me down to the vice principal, and he couldn't believe it because he was reading the book too. So we talked about the book the whole time I was in detention. We were talking about and then the killers came into the farmhouse, and then we were talking about the book, and that was the one time I got sent to detention.
It's crazy. So I was on the school newspaper and everything. So at one point we had to wear these blazers and these ties and the whole thing.
This is high school.
High school, yeah. The blazer with the little emblem on it.
Yeah.
And then at one point they said, okay, we'll give you kids a break. You don't have to wear a blazer after March 15th because it gets warmer. But we'll sell you these shirts, these button-down shirts that you don't have to wear. There's no tie, and they have the emblem on the on the pocket. And I basically wrote in, I go, terrific. The Xavier administration gave us kids a break by forcing us to pay $25 for pastel-colored bowling shirts we get to wear to school every day. And so I got in trouble for Reagan. He goes, do you know how much money we raise from those shirts and what that pays for? I'm like, yeah, but we walk around with these ridiculous, like bright green, orange, yellow shirts on the subway in Manhattan. You want to get killed? What's wrong with you? But they just didn't get it, And the thing is, with me, it was like I was in a different kind of place because I had to work.
Clearly,
had to work after school every day because my dad used to bet on horses, and some of them are still running. And so at age like 13, 14, I'm making pizzas in downtown Brooklyn, and I'm working as a busboy. So I would get out of school, like I'd bring my books on the subway, hit the restaurant, work till midnight, and get home, do more homework, and then be back at school the next day. So I was in a whole, people say, you're wasting your parents' money. And I go, no, it's my money I'm spending. I'm paying for this stuff, But so I couldn't deal with all these little rules and boxes they kept defining, because I would see things in a bigger light and kind of see things, for what they were.
Was there somebody in Jennifer told me there was somebody, must have been in high school, who, knew that you were more than just a malcontent, that you were smart, like really smart, and kind of helped you. What was that situation?
There were a couple of people saw me for more than just this rabble rouser.
Smart ass.
Yes. But there were two. One was my history professor. I took AP history and I took constitutional history. This guy named Caruso, and
not David.
Not David. Okay. No. But you got to understand that one is Xavier's well, for them, one of their proudest alumni was Antonin Scalia, right? Supreme. Right. Not that we agree with his decisions. However, his arguments were eloquently written. I mean, he wrote. He knew how to write arguments. So the idea was
a wordsmith. He was a real wordsmith.
Exactly, and they used to say, and he studied in Mr. Caruso's history class. Okay, so I had Mr. Caruso later in his life, obviously, but he would say, one of our postgraduates is Judge Scalia, and you have to be able to. And so he saw I had this talent for writing and understanding and oration. So he was kind of behind me, and the other person was my chemistry teacher, Steve Rippon. They're probably both no longer with us. But Steve's thing was, and I kind of knew this, but other people didn't realize, he was an alcoholic. And Steve would come to class kind of hungover, and he'd light a cigarette. He goes, Simonini, come up here. I'm like, sure. He goes, did you read the chapter last night? I go, yeah. You understand it? I go, yeah, pretty much. Good. So
tell the class.
Start teaching the class. I go up there on the board and start drawing nurse equations and this and that. And he's sitting there smiling. He goes, looks fine. And then 20 minutes in, he kind of sober up a little bit with his coffee. He's probably had a couple of shots of bourbon in there. And then he'd snap in. I'll grab the chalk. I'll take it from here. And
he's back in stride. Yeah.
But he was definitely an advocate, to stay focused, But they both kind of saw what I had.
And then you went to school at where? Jim just said at New York.
So NYU, yeah.
NYU,
right. So I went there on a scholarship, which
and studied history.
And I majored in history and was pre-med. But I wound up taking that, finishing that journalism class. But I also took history. I took some English literature classes. I took criminology classes. It was great. It was a great experience. I graduated in 3 years.
Pre-med requires a pretty heavy dose of science and math and chemistry and biology. You got to take a lot of those classes.
The sciences were the fun part. See, I was that guy I was the curve breaker. Okay, I would literally. I would sit in class and remember this guy, Professor Campbell. He was must have been looks like he was 6'11", but he weighed maybe 80 pounds. This tall, stringy guy with these giant boots that were probably anchored him to the earth. And he wore this this scarf, even though it'd be summertime, and this corduroy jacket. And he used to draw on those blackboards back when they had those 8 blackboards you slide up and down, left and right.
Yeah.
So, and he derived the entire Bohr atom, the whole equation of force and distance and NV squared and all that. And so he'd fill up 8 blackboards worth of stuff, and I'd sit there in the front row. Everyone's saying, there's 3,000 kids were in general chemistry 1, so maybe in this particular class it's 600 kids, and they'll look up what's he doing? We got to know this stuff. And I'd be raising my hand on blackboard number 6, Professor Campbell, but you're assuming that the constant is 0, but isn't it true that actually with these micro changes in distance, that gravity and force also change? And he stops. He goes, well, when you take physical chemistry 2 years from now, we'll add those factors in, but right now we could assume them to be 0. And everyone looks who is this guy that's correcting him on this? I was that guy, and I had this gift for sciences, organic chemistry too. I would figure it out.
Those were the toughest courses. I came nowhere close to taking anything like that in college. I always felt sorry for them. I had pre-meds all around me at Stanford, and I just felt sorry for these guys, the way they had to work their tails off.
That sounds a little bit more it sounds more difficult than physical education at the University of Arizona, which I'm not even sure that I made it through that. But okay, so
it's competitive though. Those guys were cutthroat. That's the thing. That everybody was so eager to get. Because think about it, 3,000-4,000 people want to be pre-med, and only 100 get to take the MCATs. So they all get weeded out, and out of those, maybe 70 get in. So there's so people are like, like not telling you what they learned in class, not telling you what the test is going to be about. And then in organic chemistry lab, it's like cooking. You're mixing this, mixing that. And people would like sabotage people's experiments by turning a Bunsen burner a little higher or turning something off.
Yeah.
And I would be the opposite. I would like make extra stuff and say, all right, hey, whose thing blew up? Okay, here, take some of mine. You'll be fine. And they'd be like, hey, man, what are you doing? You're going to mess up the curve. I mean, people need to fail. Otherwise, I'm like, I go, hey, man, there's so many things in life to trip on. It shouldn't be that you couldn't like boil your benzene. It shouldn't be about that.
But you need to go create some, yeah.
Yeah. So it was interesting dynamic. And I think the thing that was tough for me is that when I kind of avoided those kind of guys, the cutthroat, I call them the cutthroat privileged kids from the suburbs that came in,
Mm-hmm.
But when I got into medical school, it was like, oh my God, here they are. It's like they're all here.
These are the ones who made it, yeah.
The ones who made it, yeah. And so I found myself having very little in common with a lot of these guys because I was like this, I don't know, I came up very, very differently. I had this, these wits and I figured things out. But it was tough because how do you turn off being competitive and cutthroat now that you're in medical school? It's different.
So you went to medical school where?
So I went to in State University of New York at Stony Brook, Long Island. It was the only medical school I could afford actually because it was good. Medical school, was a lot of money. And back then they would give you these generous things called HEAL loans, which they should call them injury loans because what they were, you could borrow all your tuition, interest plus 3% of the prime, compounded quarterly. So you could wind up owing $1 million by the time you pay off your student loans. So I picked Stony Brook. It was a good school. It was a state school. It was like maybe 20% of what NYU-Med was. So I wound up going out there, and that was my first experience living in Eastern Long Island and in the Long Island Expressway, and yeah, it was an interesting experience.
How long is medical school?
It's 4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
All right. So at this point, you're 4 years of college, and then you do 4 years of medical school, right?
Right.
And then from there, I think I glanced at your Wikipedia page. I didn't spend a lot of time because we have a relationship and other things that I wanted to talk to you about. But it seemed from that point on, you were in like 6 different like cities, practicing or doing your internship or whatever the doctors do up until the point that you ended up in Los Angeles. Where?
Yeah, well, the first place when I left Stony Brook, I went to NYU, back to NYU, NYU Hospital in Bellevue. And to me,
Bellevue, yeah.
The best place you could work at, the best place you could train at, because as we said, everything that could stop a speeding bullet, get hit by a truck, fall off a building, north of the canal, south of the park, came to Bellevue, and we saw it all. We saw prisoners, we saw cops, firemen, we saw homeless, and you really, it's talk about triage, talk about having an ER where there's like hundreds of people trying to get in, and everyone's sick, and also the Bellevue ER had this kind of smell that you never forget, like this funk. Think about you have like 100 homeless people hadn't bathed in like years, and they're sitting around the corner, and 50 drunks in this corner, and people vomiting in the other corner along with everybody else. I just had this smell that you'd never forget. But you learned everything, you saw everything. It was like after spending 3 years there was like nothing you were afraid of, and the characters. I mean, the patients were characters. I mean, we had patients who were like, we called them the Bellevue 400 because they kept coming back and coming back. There's one guy named Broadway Bob, we used to call him, and Broadway Bob lived in a Manor refrigerator box, okay, in Thompson Square Park. That was his box. And eventually the cops said, you can't stay here. So he wound up getting a wheelchair from the clinic and mounted the box to a wheelchair. So you see this Manor box, wheeling down First Avenue with holes for the arms, a hole for him, for him to see. And he'd wheel in this box, he'd come in, that's Broadway Bob's house, basically, that he lived in. And Broadway Bob had tuberculosis, right? And so this is a little trick. If you have tuberculosis and you're in Manhattan and you're homeless, come October, you stop taking your meds. Why? Because if you stop taking your meds, come November, your TB gets reactivated and you have a fever, cough, and guess what? the law says you have to be confined to a hospital. So if you need to have 3 hots in a cot in Manhattan in the dead of winter, have tuberculosis, because Bellevue had a 200-bed tuberculosis ward. And Broadway would every November would come in with a fever 104, TB, goes, hey, I think my TB's come back again. I got to come to the hospital and stay at the Bellevue, you know what I'm saying? And that was, and there was a lot of guys like Broadway that would come in, you know. There was this girl named Rosie. Rosie was, so I used to have this apartment on 22nd Street. Rosie slept in the streets on 21st. I used to pass her every day, you know, walking to the hospital. Rosie was a hooker and a heroin addict and a diabetic, which means that she got free needles for insulin. So she didn't have to worry about so she never got AIDS or any infection because she got clean needles all the time. So she would use her needles, and then she would sell the needles to buy more drugs. But then there were times when she had no more money. She couldn't turn any tricks or whatever she did. So she would stop taking her insulin. Why? Because that would make her sugar climb up the wall. She'd pass out. They'd bring her into the hospital in a diabetic coma. So for the first day, she'd be in the intensive care unit to get her sugars down, and then it takes a couple more days to balance her out. So she'd be walking around. So what did Rosie do at 3 a.m. at that Bellevue Hospital? She would turn tricks with the corrections officers who were watching the prisoner patients, and that's how Rosie made her living in the wintertime when she had no money.
Oh my goodness!
And she was on the Bellevue 400.
I think Bellevue was the model for that great George C. Scott movie, that Paddy Chayefsky film, the
hospital. Yeah. And a lot of people try to recreate that show. There's a couple of shows out there based on Bellevue, but it's not. Yeah. It's too sanitized. It's not quite there. It's not gritty enough. It's not, you know. I mean, it was a serious place. I mean, there was a prison ward on the 19th floor. You had to go through double gates to get in, and and these guys used to try to play you and punk you. Goes, hey doc, I killed somebody. I'm like, well, that's great, but unless you behave, you're not going to get your meds. And guess what? Okay. No, it was, like I said.
How long were you at Bellevue?
3 years.
Wow.
It's like, I recommend it to anybody. I mean, I remember they used to give me all the difficult interns when I became a resident. Like there was one kid, he graduated Harvard, so he knew everything by book, but he never actually worked in a serious hospital. And he comes up to me, he says, he's talking to this guy who uses, most guys were IV drug users, had endocarditis and infections. And you're like, excuse me, sir, do you realize by injecting drugs into your veins, you're causing harm to your heart and endangering your life? The guy like
to the drug addict.
The guy be like, man, I need my methadone. What is this guy telling me, man? What is guy coming? I'm like, but he didn't get it, But eventually, pretty soon, it's like you get it. So you learn how to prioritize and triage. That's the thing, triage. And the funny thing was, I worked my way as a waiter all these years, and then obviously I quit when I went to med school. But being a waiter in a busy Manhattan restaurant teaches you how to triage. So when I was an intern and resident at Bellevue, I was the most efficient one. I'd handle like 20 patients, have everybody coming and going. I know, he needs this, he needs that, he needs that, and I was very good at making sure people got what they needed, and it's like carrying that life lesson of how to handle people and their needs, and that's kind of like what I learned.
Was there anything about working at Bellevue that equipped you to play Randall P. McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
I tell you, so two things.
Looney himself.
So two things informed me on playing McMurphy. Bellevue definitely. I met all these characters, and you got to really see, different parts of the human mind and the different echoes of the soul and where they can come from. But the other thing that really informed me was when I was doing my psychiatry rotation.
Okay.
And I remember I worked at a VA hospital, and they assigned me 6 chronic schizophrenics.
Oh.
And they had been like on drugs for like a decade at least, and so I have these.
I can hear that music from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest right now.
And I tell you, these guys were like in these rooms, like lip smacking and my job was to go in there every day and talk to them, And then what I would do, they didn't really talk back, but they had this wonderful lawn at the VA, so I would take them outside, and make them lay in the sun and get some sunlight, and they would say to me, what are you doing, Simonini? You can't take these people outside. They don't have day privileges. I go, where are they going to go? Did they not? I mean, it's like they at least give them some sun. I mean, even the plant needs sun. You know? And so I remember, like, and I would sit, and the professor would make us meet at 6 p.m. This is in the summertime, to talk about all the patients on the ward. I mean, 6 p.m. And I mean, I want to go out, I want to get some sunlight, maybe hit the beach. And like, he's talking for like an hour and a half, and I'd sit there like, just, say nothing. My face said everything. I remember one day he says to me, young man, you have a problem? I go, no problem. No, we're here to share. Tell me anything they want to say. I go, nah, it's all good. No. He goes, come on, we have to be honest with each other. It's psychiatry. I'm like, okay, great. You want me to be honest? Fine. This thing says progress note. There's no progress. These guys ain't going anywhere. These guys basically they're going to live here the rest of their life. You basically turned them into a side dish. They're taking these meds. They're all having the side effects.
Turn them into a side dish?
Yeah. It's like
okay, keep going.
You literally there's nothing in these guys. I mean, so every day we talk about this, that, and the other thing. I think the progress in psychiatry, it's probably lagged behind everything else. And he was enraged. He was like, oh, see, because I questioned the establishment, and because they were into doing shock therapy on people and all these things. So these people were like the ward in Cuckoo's Nest. They were just these marginalized, forgotten.
Yep.
And so here I was fighting the system, questioning what they were doing, and actually fighting for like these guys, saying, I go, there's got to be something more than just giving a bunch of drugs, which turn them into these people laying around.
Warehouse them, warehouse.
Yeah, warehousing, exactly. So that also informed me to play Mac.
Yeah, I bet that would. You went from. Why did you leave? So you're there for 3 years, and you're at this point you're. At this point, are you still in?
So you're in training. So you're 3 years to get your training in internal medicine, and then you have to decide, okay, what's your specialty?
Right. Okay. So you were still in that part where you're in training.
Yeah.
Okay. So you did the 3 years there.
Yep.
And then you left there because why?
So then, okay, I left there to chase my career, chase my dream.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to do cardiology.
Okay.
But I didn't want to just do cardiology. I wanted to do research. I wanted to make a difference. I thought, I could come up with something. Maybe I could do something that could help lots of people. I could make a difference. So I was looking for a place to work or a place to go to where I could do research. And I found an alumni of Bellevue who was in San Francisco at UCSF. And I reached out to him. I said, listen, I'm finishing my program. I want to do cardiology, but I also want to, I don't want to just like graduate and be in practice. I want to do something, be a game changer. I want to do science. I want to teach. I want to, come out to San Francisco, And so I applied for a grant. So I got a grant from the Heart Association, and I got a grant from the NIH. And I came out to UCSF Medical Center in San Francisco, and I did research in heart failure. I did clinical pharmacology. I learned about doing trials in heart failure. I did science. I did bench science for 4 years. I was doing, it's called molecular cardiology.
In San Francisco.
In San Francisco,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I took this kind of detour in my training to do science, And so some people call, it could have been like a PhD track, but I was just doing research in the lab without getting the actual PhD. And there was training in heart failure and molecular cardiology, clinical pharmacology, and these were all things I was doing to kind of, launch like a science career. I wanted to be that triple threat who did science, who saw patients, and who taught. And that was, also an incredible experience. And living in San Francisco was a great experience. I got to publish papers. I got to do mean things to mice.
Yeah. At what point in your life did the AIDS crisis happen? How old were you when?
So the AIDS crisis was happening at Bellevue. In fact,
okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I tell you, I've always believed. You always got to say, you never take things for granted, because there go I, if not for God and not for luck and all that. And I remember the chief of medicine at Bellevue was a guy named Saul Farber. And Saul was the true humanitarian because he ran Bellevue Hospital, which is a city hospital, and he also ran NYU Tisch, the private hospital next door. And the deal he made with the doctors, if you want to work at Tisch Hospital in practice and make all the money from all the rich New York people, you have to volunteer 2 months at Bellevue and teach the students, interns, and residents. And you have to treat them the same way at Bellevue that you treat them at Tisch. And he was all about that, about egalitarianism, and everyone gets the same treatment and the same attention. And there were a couple of times, and he would say, we're here during AIDS. This is a privilege to be able to be working in the city with such a need, with this endemic condition, and we're going to get a chance to learn about something and help a lot of people. He says, when I was in training, we learned it was pneumonia that killed people. Now you have AIDS, and you're going to learn that. And there were some people that didn't buy into that. They'll say, well, why should we? And they didn't last at Bellevue. In fact, there was one kid I remember. There's a book, House of God, which I never really thought was such a great book, but it talks about it was written for the Mass General Med School, and it had all these like little sayings and things that people would do. So a lot of guys would quote House of Gods, and there's some very derogatory ways to refer to patients and people, implying that, hey, you're better than them, or these guys are this and this. And this one resident during rounds, where you have to present to Dr. Farber, he's presenting a patient, and he used one of these expressions that was from House of God, which basically referred to the patient as something less than human. And I remember Farber was like, excuse me, what was that phrase you said? He goes, come on, Dr. Farber, House of God. And he goes, so, and he heard, and the expression basically was referring to a patient as a subhuman piece of shit. Schpoes, that was the word they used.
Oh, okay.
And Farber said, young man, take your white coat off, and call your parents and tell them that you won't be becoming a doctor. Not as long as I could help it. And he fired him from the program. And he looked at all of us and said, don't anyone ever think they're better than any other human being. And I loved him for that. That's like, that was the message of Bellevue, that we cared about everybody, and we were champions of people that had no one to champion them.
Oh, that's kind of the message behind that William Hurt movie, The Doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
You know that movie? Yeah. Yeah. Learn their names. Learn your patients' names.
Yeah. And I've
always the message. They're humans too.
Correct. And I've always adopted that. I've always went in, got to know people. It's like, when I teach students, it's like, know who you're talking to, know what's important to them.
So when you're in San Francisco, when did your acting career start as far as doing theater? When you were in San Francisco, were you doing any of that?
So in San Francisco, I was spending a lot of days in the lab, right, doing all these things. So I started that's when I first looked into acting, So San Francisco had the Conservatory Theater in Gary Street, and so I went there and they took Intro to Acting, and it's a conservatory program. So basically, each level, you have to be asked to take the next level, and I said, I'll just keep going until they tell me to go away, and they didn't ask me to go away. I kept coming back, taking Intro. Then I took a monologue class, a scene class. And then I took improv with Bay Area Theater Sports, and I was doing improv classes. And so that was something I was kind of doing like when I wasn't in the lab. And it was this kind of thing I did. And it was something fun, something completely different, as John Cleese would say, and it kind of fed, I realized it was feeding a part of me that everything else wasn't feeding. And I found that I really liked theater and I liked acting because I've always loved movies, because my mom, the way I bonded with my mom, besides her amazing pasta sauce, was she watched movies till the sun came up, waiting for my dad to come home, and he never came home. So we would sit there and watch these old black and white films, and she would sit there, tears rolling down her cheek, and saying, "Look, that's how it's supposed to be when someone loves somebody. See how?" And of course, the good guy always wins, and there's always a kiss at the end, and end credits and all that. So I had this this world of the cinema that I would watch, and I'd say, "Wow, there's something out there." When you grow up in this little apartment in Brooklyn, with no money, that becomes your escape. That in the library, and so I always had that in the back of my mind. And so suddenly watching it become real, like be on stage and create that, and it's intoxicating.
Yeah. All right. So how long did you spend in San Francisco?
I was 4 years in San Francisco.
And then you decided, okay, now I'm going to be a cardiologist?
So now you have to do your cardiology training. And
right. Okay. What does that entail?
So that means spending time learning the specialty of cardiology, doing procedures on patients, learning about echocardiography.
How long does that take?
So now because of all the work I had already done in San Francisco, I needed like 2 more years to do it.
Wow. Okay.
And so I picked the University of Michigan.
Okay. Well, any special reason?
Well, so because of what I was doing in San Francisco, the papers I was publishing, I became like sought after. People actually recruiting me to do their fellowship at their place. And at the time, Michigan had this Japanese scientist named Seigo Izumo, and he actually identified this gene which in the embryo tells a cell to become a heart. And he called it the Tin Man gene, if I only had a heart.
Wow.
Right? Yeah.
And so he was a scientist. I met him. He said, you come to Michigan, you work with me, I'll finish your career as a scientist. So that was part of it. The other part of it was, was personal. I was at the time I was involved with somebody who was from the Midwest, and we were supposed to get married, and she wanted to have a house with horses and chickens and a big old fence that she could whitewash every now and then. And I was like, well, I can't do that in San Francisco unless my name is Spielberg or Lucas.
Yeah.
So I picked University of Michigan because Midwest, but she never came. I wound up being in Ann Arbor by myself. But that was a great program. I got to meet.
Michigan's one of the great institutions in the world.
Yeah.
University of Michigan.
So it was terrific, and had great mentors, great teachers. I mean, a guy named Bert Pitt, who's still around. He's like in his 90s now. Bert Pitt used to teach in the cardiac care unit with this white coat and this gold-plated stethoscope in one pocket and a bunch of Burger King applications in the other pocket. and he would go around the room asking questions. And if you got too many things wrong, it's okay, don't worry. You know what? There's a job you can have. It's okay. And he'd give you the application. When the alarm goes off, you turn over the burgers and just don't burn them. It's okay. And so every day, please God, don't let me get a Burger King application. And I spent like 2 months with the guy. And at the end of the 2 months, he goes, I need to talk to you. I'm like, oh, geez, I'm getting the application now. Have it your way. No. And he brings me aside. He goes, you were terrific. I've never met anybody like you in years. What are your plans? You have to make sure you do the right thing because you're a smart. I was like, wow, he's softened up. I became like my friend. And then I became a member of the Heart Failure Society of America, which is what he was a part of. So I became my subspecialty, heart failure, and then that became the thing I went for. So yeah, a lot of great people there, and they tried to get me to stay, in Michigan when I finished. Go, come on, you have faculty jobs, a great place to be, great place to raise kids. I go, yeah, but I don't have kids. I'm just me. So I'm a single guy in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So
when you were in Michigan, were you acting?
So this is great. Yeah. So I'm in Michigan. I felt like here I am in the Midwest, and I walked into this cafe in Ann Arbor. There's a bunch of guys doing improv on stage, and I joined them, and we were called the Portuguese Rodeo Clown Company, and we would do improv. We would do like whose lines anyway. We get suggestions from the audience, and we create things, and we perform every Friday night, and eventually we moved to the Main Street Comedy Showcase, and we'd open up for like Seinfeld and Judy Tenuta. We do our 1 hour improv and these games, and then I did Second City, Detroit. There was Improv Olympics in Chicago. Chicago's like a quick 3 hour drive when you're breaking the speed limit. Plus you get the hour back with the time change. Mm-hmm. And so I would go to Chicago on the weekend and do Improv Olympics. So this became my other side gig. And the thing was, the Japanese scientist, Izumo, with his whole staff that spoke very little English, they would come to the comedy shows every Friday night. And even though they couldn't understand what we were saying, they laughed hysterically because the physical comedy, and they got the beats. And that became this thing, and then eventually we competed. We got invited to Toronto to the Second City. There was this big improvathon that we competed against different groups, and we wound up being runner-up to a group called the Capital Steps from DC. But we got so good.
I heard of them. They were really well done.
They were very
on
good.
PBS quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So they beat us out. But we were so good that we had internal band strife, and people started like breaking up. Man, I should get more stage time. I'm like, dude, we're in Michigan, man. This is not the time to be breaking up and arguing. It's like so the band eventually broke up. But somewhere out there, there's probably 1,000 tapes of all these performances we did in random bars and cafes and stages and throughout Michigan, and some pretty funny stuff. Pretty funny stuff. But yeah.
Did you go? All right, so you're in Michigan. You have now gone to enough school that you can practice as a cardiologist, yes. And you're pretty funny, and you're pretty good on the improv stage, right? You've been around a lot of talented people, and it sounded like that group was highly successful. So where do you go from there?
So then it came time to pick a job, pick a place where I could do my first career job. And so I was applying to different hospitals. I was thinking of going back to New York because I had been, I figured I'm like Marco Polo. I left. Now I got to come back,
Yeah.
Except they didn't really have noodles yet to bring back to Italy, so you know. So
they already had pasta. They didn't need pasta.
Exactly. It's like, I always figure if I come back,
Marco got ahead of you. Yeah.
So I looked at Columbia. I looked at Texas Heart. Michigan wanted me to stay, and people wanted me because I was publishing, right? So that was the thing. I had grant money.
When you published, Rico, you published for who? For other doctors, doctor magazines,
medical journals.
Medical journals, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they don't have centerfolds in those journals, but no. But they should. They sell more, but
they would, yeah.
But no, like I publish in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. Circulation was another journal. Circulation Research. So these were some of these were like the top 5 cited journals that cardiologists read. So I was published in pretty prestigious journals, and I had gotten grant money from the NIH and so National Institutes of Health. So I was a young scientist busting out, and I actually, what was great. So I always think of this. My talent is, or what I'm blessed is that I have a way of maybe it's probably my father's street smarts too that comes into me, looking at something that exists and saying, okay, what are they missing, and trying to apply something from here and put into what I'm trying to do. So for example, I was interested in studying heart disease and research and atherosclerosis, hardening your arteries and plaque and how plaques grow in your arteries and block them. And so I said, okay, you know what? This is all inflammation, and they always say there's nothing new under the sun because people stumble upon things and forget about them. Like probably years ago, the Vikings discovered America and got too drunk to remember where it was. Hey, Sven, where is that place? I don't know. I drank too much meat. And then years later, Columbus is like, it's over here, But so someone always stumbles upon things, So years ago, there was a guy named Virchow that called atherosclerosis it comes from German, hardening or inflaming of the arteries, inflammation. They thought inflammation was what caused atherosclerosis, and then, but then back then, the biggest cause of aortitis and things in men was syphilis, because they would get syphilis and they would get these plaques in their aortas, and then years later, well, what if you don't have syphilis? Then there can't be inflammation. So they dropped the theory, and now the theory came back again. So I said, of course, it's got to be inflammation. So at Michigan, I looked up the smartest guy who knew about inflammation. And he wasn't a cardiologist. He was actually a lung doctor, a pulmonologist. And he was doing research in lung cancer and inflammation and how lung cancer spreads. And how lung cancer spreads, it grows, it needs a blood supply to continue to proliferate. So it causes these cells to come to the area and make new blood supplies. That's called neovascularization, new blood supplies. And guess what? Atherosclerotic plaque does the same thing. It grows, gets a blood supply, and spreads out. So
you talk about plaque on the heart, in the veins, and okay.
So I went to this guy. I said, "Listen, you have this lab. You're looking at all these molecules. Why would nature create a whole bunch of molecules just for the heart? These molecules that you're looking at in the lung cancer and scarring of the lung, I bet they happen in the heart as well." And he goes, "I bet they do." So I had this whole lab that was already geared to looking at all these molecules. So I turned all these experiments on cardiac tissue and cardiac cells. And I wound up publishing a bunch of papers on angiogenesis and heart disease and all these molecules that control. It's like basically what I try to simplify it as, which I always get accused of, you can't simplify it like that. I go, why not? Is that we have injury and repair. That's this dynamic, the yin and yang, injury and repair. And what plaque is in the artery is like it's an exaggerated repair, because the arteries are constantly getting injured, either from cholesterol or from smoking and things, and your arteries are trying to repair themselves, but over time, the repair mechanism over exceeds, and you start getting scar and plaque. So the same way, if you kept on like cutting yourself, you get a keloid, a thick scar inside your artery, you start getting this deposition of material and tissue that causes plaque to form. So that was my theory.
Well, you mentioned cholesterol. Has there been a change in the way the doctors think about cholesterol now as compared to 20 years ago?
So it's funny, because the cholesterol story has been cyclical, right? Because so one of the first cholesterol studies was the West of Scotland trial, where they took Scottish people and they gave them cholesterol drugs, because being Scottish is kind of risky and it gives you heart disease. And so it had people over 35 taking a cholesterol lowering drug, and found that if you took your cholesterol lowering drug, you had a 20% less chance of having your first heart attack. And that was the very first primary prevention study, saying that if I take a pill, I won't get heart problems. And that became
a Lipitor type of pill?
It was called Pravachol. It was the first generation statin, which basically is a derivative of red rice yeast, which you could buy, over the counter in any health food store. Except you got to take like five grams of that stuff to get what you get in taking a Pravachol. And that started the whole cholesterol narrative. And then somewhere along the line, there's like Time magazine says the myth of cholesterol, and it has like a frying pan to cover with 2 fried eggs. Saying people taking cholesterol pills are damaging their brains and getting depression and being suicidal. And suddenly the whole cholesterol thing was being like, kicked aside. This is all nonsense and crap. And then they did more studies. They did the Swedish study, the 4S study. And they found out if you've ever had a heart attack and you take simvastatin, Zocor, that risk of having a heart attack drops by taking cholesterol lowering. So now it's pretty much, we know that lowering cholesterol definitely prevents heart attacks, and that.
But what does it do exactly? It prevents heart attacks, but what does it do to the heart and to the thing
to your cells, your arteries. So here,
the arteries, yeah.
So here's what I tell people. This is so the biggest organ in your body is actually what I call the skin within. Okay, so your arteries have an inner lining. Okay, it's a skin. The fancy word is endothelium. So I call it the skin within. And if you took all your arteries in your body and you put them all end to end, and I remember this when I was a kid. There's a book that DeBakey edited. There's a guy standing on the planet Earth with arteries coming out of his chest that goes around the moon and back 3 times. Okay?
Wow.
So and I said, wow, this is cool. I was like 7 years old looking at this cart. I got to be a cart doctor. This is a cool thing to be able to know about. And if you take those cells and put them all together, it would take up like 5 or 6 football fields. So the skin within is like 5 or 6 football fields. So when you're young, the football field is like that lush green Michigan Stadium, that green bouncy stuff that you're not afraid to fall on because it's not going to hurt, right? But then as you get older and as you get exposed to cholesterol, particularly the bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, or the very bad cholesterols, what that does, that causes...
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
What bad cholesterol, not so bad cholesterol, what are you talking about? Like food? Are you talking about... drinking, smoking. What are you talking about?
So the cholesterol we have, we get, it comes from diet, So eating red meats, eating cheeses. Okay. But some of us also have genetic predispositions to having high cholesterols. Okay. And then in addition to cholesterol, there's a thing out there called lipoprotein A, which we call LIP-A, little a, and that's another. So I call it. So there's a good cholesterol, which is HDL. The bad cholesterol, which is LDL, and the ugly cholesterol, which is lipo-A. So it's the good, the bad, the ugly. Is how you remember that. And Clint Eastwood was like the statin.
Now I can remember it. Yeah,
exactly.
now I got it.
So Clint Eastwood was like your statin. I see you over there. Get away from that artery. Anyway, but
Blondie.
Blondie, exactly.
Blondie.
Or Eli Wallach. I'm going to block your artery. So here's an aside by Eli Wallach. So one of my patients, he lived on this street actually. We were on Hortense. He was friends with Eli Wallach, and he was friends with Harry Guardino. Actually, it was Harry Guardino.
Oh, cool!
Harry Guardino's roommate back in the day, and this guy's name was Tommy Castronova, was no longer with us. Great Sicilian guy, salty guy. He directed me in a lot of plays. So he was friends with Eli, and Eli Wallach's wife was an actress.
Ann Jackson.
Yes, and she was opening a play on Broadway, and it was I think it may have been the Tennessee Williams play. Anyway, so he's in the audience with he's sitting down with Eli, waiting for the play to open. So he goes, Eli, what you got going on? And Eli's like, well, Clint Eastwood wants me to go to Italy, do this movie with him, this cowboy movie. But I think I'm going to stay here and for my wife, support her. I'll be here, hang out, do the play, watch her do the play, because it's a cowboy movie. He wants to go do a cowboy movie. Opening night, the play was a bomb, terrible. And TJ said to Eli, get on a plane to Italy. This play's going nowhere. And sure enough, the play went down in a week, shut down. Eli went to Italy, and the rest was history.
Yeah, surgery. Yeah.
So see, if that play was a success and she had a successful run, Eli would not have been in that
good,
movie.
bad, the ugly, and the
you see that?
yeah.
Anyway, but to get back, so that cholesterol, the bad and the ugly cholesterol, they oxidize and they damage that beautiful green grass, starts getting yellow and hard and tough, and starts getting plaque, like things start sticking to it, because your white cells are out there defending, your white blood cells are out there trying to defend you from these invaders. So it tries to gobble up the cholesterol, gobble up and take it away. But eventually, it's like the battleground of the white cells trying to attack the cholesterol, and eventually you start getting the casualties of that war, those dead white cells and those the debris deposits along the lining of the arteries, and that grass starts getting covered with this stuff, and over time it builds, and then sometimes you have like inside that debris you have soft cholesterol liquid, like fatty liquid just hanging out in there, and then you have these plaques that just kind of form. And eventually they could block the entire artery, or sometimes they could go up to like maybe block 30-40% of the artery, and they could rupture, and when they rupture, your body sees, hey, there's damage, and these platelets that cause clotting, they go to the area, and suddenly you have this area that was 40% blocked becomes 100% blocked within minutes, because your platelets are trying to heal this rupture by blocking it, and then you get a heart attack. So inflammation leads to plaque buildup, and then plaque rupture activates platelets. That's why blocking platelets and your blood clotting factor is important. But if you prevent the inflammation, you could slow down that progression.
Tell me how being I can't think of the word, but nervous. Like what's the word I'm looking for? Stress.
And
yeah.
anxiety.
Tell me how stress, how something that you're like going through your brain can affect. Does it affect plaque, or does it affect your heart? I mean, you're shaking your head. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, stress is a killer.
How?
I mean,
how? Physiologically, I can't even say the words, but I'm a little out of my depth here.
No. Physiologically, psychologically. I mean, stress. Okay. When we're stressed, we're all these, like, on some level, we're all these like primitive creatures have this fight or flight mechanism, right? So we release adrenaline when we're stressed. So stress, they did studies. People that have high stress jobs have a higher incidence of having heart disease. Yeah. So like air traffic controllers, policemen, all these people that have like dealing with stress where lives are at stake. It affects the way we sleep, the way we our diet, what we do, but stress kind of releases adrenaline, and adrenaline actually activates platelets, make platelets stickier, so it makes you more prone to making blood clots, and stress can also trigger rupture of plaque. In fact, they did a study. most heart attacks happen between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. Why? Because in the middle of the night, your cortisol levels start coming up. It's your stress hormone. So we have these variations in cortisol. When we sleep, it goes down and it starts coming up. And when it comes up, eventually it wakes us up. That's how our body clocks know, hey, time to wake up, you know. But that cortisol increasing also comes along with it, rise of other hormones like stress hormones, like adrenaline. And that causes triggering and rupturing of plaque. So that's why people will wake up at 4 a.m, or they don't wake up and they have sudden death in the middle of the night. So stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, all could trigger heart attacks. All can make your blood pressure a little bit higher, a little more stress on the heart, a little more stress on the system. So stress, yes, is a killer. So we should all wake up every day and say, home.
How many hours do you sleep a night?
How many hours? I'm not the guy to ask. I sleep.
Okay.
Because
how many hours? 8 hours, right? People should get 8 hours of sleep. It's the healthiest if you can.
It'd be great to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep. I mean, unfortunately, my phone rings. You know,
keep that phone next to you.
Well, right. It's patients calling, the hospital's calling. So that's the ironic thing. We're the healthcare providers, and yet you know we were expected not to sleep and be up 3-4 days in a row, like in our
yeah.
That's the irony. Like at Bellevue, you had to be on call. You know, like be up 36 hours straight. And be informed and be polished by rounds, be able to present all the cases and keys. No.
Okay, listen, I could talk. I find this fascinating. I find you fascinating for a number of reasons. But I want to get a little selfish here and ask you some questions about me and about like people my age and so one of the things I want to ask you about is please talk to me about the drug that women and men are taking now to become thinner. What it started out as, Jim said, 1 in 8 people now in America are on this and Ozempic, and now there's different forms, and it's so effing expensive, dude. It's expensive for me, so it's got to be expensive. And can you talk to me a little bit about drug prices and like why? Like how does Ozempic go from probably what it was, which was nothing, to like now $400? Can you?
Well, there's
I'm sure
two different conversations.
They are.
Ozempic and drug pricing. Drug pricing, I know because I've been involved in clinical trials, and nowadays the average amount of money they spend on developing could be anywhere from $2 to $4 billion with a B.
But Ozempic that had been around forever, used for a different reason, correct?
Well, the semaglutides were developed for diabetes.
Diabetes, right?
Yeah. And what they found, there was a side effect where you lost weight. And so suddenly it went from one primary use to the secondary use, which is losing weight, which a lot of drugs, you could be surprised how many drugs have this accidental finding that people wind up making more profit from. I mean, when I was a fellow in San Francisco, one of the drugs I had to investigate was an intravenous drug by Pfizer, which was designed for heart failure. The idea was your heart doesn't work very well, the pump doesn't work very well. Let's dilate the vessels so the heart has less resistance. It makes it easier to work. But unfortunately, that which seems intuitive in medicine doesn't pan out when you actually do the study and look at the drug. So I had hooked up about 6 or 7 vets to this infusion pump, and they stopped the study. The safety committee said, hey, we got to pull the drug, disconnect everybody because people are dying. They're dropping dead, and the study is a total failure. So Pfizer had spent over $100 million on this drug, and it was a quote-unquote failure. And my job was to go get these people and disconnect them. So I'm calling these vets. You know, this is all in Northern California, different Air Force bases. They're all living on these places. I'm like, sir, I need to come find you. I got to disconnect you. And these guys saying, screw off, kid. I'm like, no, sir, you don't understand. The drug is actually causing people to die. So we really can't have you on that. We got to come and disconnect you. He goes, listen, son, I've had a heart on for the last 14 days. I'm not giving this stuff up for nobody. The drug was intravenous sildenafil, intravenous Viagra. And at the time, Viagra was invented for heart failure. So I called these scientists at Pfizer. Hey, listen, these guys are saying they're having hard-ons for months. I mean, and they don't want to give it up. They'd rather die, you know. And so Pfizer, from these phone calls from me and probably other guys like me, they said they went from this $100 million failure to this $1 trillion success. They took the same drug and made a pill out of it.
Wow.
So Ozempic has that same story. It was a drug developed for diabetes.
What year was that?
Pfizer, that was back in the 90s.
90s. When we started getting the blue pills.
That's yeah. So Ozempic has that same story. It was developed for diabetes, and they found out.
So people who were taking it for diabetes, were they spending a certain amount of money for? Was it an exorbitant amount of money that they were taking it for diabetes, or is it because it now is a weight loss? That's the side effect or whatever, and everybody, certainly in Hollywood, you know, everybody's Didn't the price of it go from?
It's changed, yeah. Because what's happened is this. So first of all, I think it's criminal the way some of the pricing has gone, because you know the studies showing that if you're on Ozempic or if you're on Mounjaro, any of those these semaglutides, especially the more later generation ones that affect more than one hormone, that the incidence of heart failure, being hospitalized for heart failure, the incidence of having heart disease and dialysis, all these things go down. So they're beneficial to people that have diabetes and are prone to having heart disease. Now, when you're talking about treating obesity, people that have true morbid obesity, you know, your body mass index is like 35 and up, and you're carrying an extra 100 pounds. Guess what? Losing that weight, you know, really has great benefits in terms of longevity and heart disease and hypertension, all these things. You know, what happens is though, a lot of people in Hollywood need to lose 5 pounds, 10 pounds, and hey, I'll do some Ozempic, and I'll still go to Chuck E. Cheese, I'll still go to Fat Burger, I'll still go to In-N-Out Burger, or whatever, and they want to keep their habits by using the shot.
Yes.
And somehow what's happening now is that the pricings has changed, and you know, I still think if you have diabetes, most plans will cover it, but it's weird. I mean, I have trouble like trying to get it to patients with diabetes. They still have a copay, and they want people to copay $400 or $500, which is ridiculous because most people on a fixed income, how can they pay that kind of money?
Yeah.
So I, you know, it's I mean, I've always wondered about that because, you know, their argument's going to be, hey, we spent so much money on R&D, and from the time you conceive of a molecule on a chalkboard to the time you actually create the drug, to the time you actually test the drug, it could be 10 years, 12 years.
I understand that argument, and I've always understood that argument. But once a drug has been tested and once a drug has been out there, like the one for Ozempic was originally for what? What did you say it was for?
Diabetes.
For diabetes. So for how long had it been given to people for diabetes before people started realizing, hey, this could be used as like years, right? Years and years, right?
Well, they were earlier versions of Ozempic, like the Wegovy's and Trulicity's, but they weren't as powerful or and so what happened is as they got
as long lasting, I think
exactly. And so as each company came up with a more longer lasting drug, then you started seeing this weight loss effect, and that's kind of what happened. And the thing is, you know, the patents on drugs, when it's like a 15-year, there's 15, I forget, it's 15 or 17.
Yeah.
And so the idea, they only have so many years to make their R&D money back, you know, and then it becomes
generic.
They go
generic.
Yeah, exactly. But I still think, you know, that's one thing no one ever wants to address is pricing. And the other thing no one ever addresses, I mean, to me, I've testified against drug companies. I've done some of that. That's a scary thing to do. Think about it. Talk about the rainmaker, but no,
it's called big pharma for a reason.
Exactly. But the thing is, you know, one of the worst things that ever happened to the American public is direct to consumer marketing. Years ago, the drug lobbyists got this passed through Congress. Can you remember? Because once upon a time, you didn't see ads on TV for drugs. Okay, and so what happened was you would see ads on TVs for cigarettes, though, right? Real men smoke Marlboro, you know, or you come a long way, baby. It's like great, the incidence of cancer,
health,
exactly, right?
Go jogging, never smoke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now, but then what happened was Congress passed a law to try to outlaw cigarette advertising.
Yeah.
And what the drug lobby did, they reworded the law, not to say you cannot advertise cigarettes, to say something like, only products shown beneficial can be advertised on public airways. And that opened up the door for direct-to-consumer marketing. And the average drug spends more money than Budweiser advertising their drugs. So this whole budget comes on these TV ads where you see somebody taking this drug, and then the auctioneer guy talks really fast about the side effects, death, so all this money and budget for advertising and marketing and pushing the drugs drives up the prices of the drugs, because they have to pay for all these things, they have to pay for these ads, they have to pay for all these, people promoting, and so now it's like you have these great drugs, this great technology, great innovations, and nobody could afford it. I mean, this is not just with Ozempic and with semaglutides, and it's also with drugs for heart disease. I mean, there's drugs for heart failure, which are revolutionary, which keep people alive, and there's people getting these $1,000 copays. They're like, hey, I want to take this new pill, but I can't afford it. And so, and that's a big problem that needs to be fixed. Because.
How long has that been a problem? And it was Congress that and government that needs to fix that, or
somebody has to be strong enough to take on the pharmaceutical lobby, and they're powerful. They're talking about billions of trillions of dollars, and they have people, voting for them or protecting them in Congress. They sponsor so many things, right? They sponsor TV shows, they sponsor candidates. We tried to take on the health insurance issue, but no one really has taken on the pharmaceutical issue. The thing is, why the puzzlement should be, why should a drug cost $500 here in Los Angeles, but if you go to Italy or go to Canada it's $10.
Yes.
So why is that? So that's the kind of thing someone really needs to address, because we're getting older in America, and it's
Jim, get on that, right?
Why do you think direct to consumer marketing is a problem? I mean, the airwaves are filled with ads for drugs.
The one thing that those drug ads are most seen on news channels, Fox and MSNBC and CNN, and when you're getting so much of your funding for these news outlets, most of it from these pharmaceutical companies, especially now that people are losing interest in these major networks, you're funding their channels, so they don't want to turn around and do stories about your drugs and your drug prices. So you're affecting our news airwaves, restricting their discussion about this thing.
And how sad is this? The news used to be, the fourth estate, right? Yep. I mean, Edward Murrow, Severide, Cronkite. It used to be this sacred thing where you reported the news, you told the truth, and you didn't care who your sponsor was. There's that famous story about Alcoa trying to pressure Murrow from not doing a story back in the 50s, and because it affected was their product. And he said, I'm doing the story, I don't care. And he went and fought with the head of CBS. I think Clooney did a movie about it, Good Night and Good Luck, but they didn't care. It was about tell the story. And now the news is being sponsored by these people, and they're catering to their sponsors. The news no longer is this unbiased reporting of facts. It's sad what the news has become, and this is exactly what we're talking about. How the pharmaceutical companies are funding it, and direct to consumer marketing is bad because it's like this. Yeah, somebody's sitting at home and they're watching the news and they're showing the latest car chase or some kangaroo that got loose, and who cares what's happening in the Ukraine? No. What's really important is that kangaroo got loose in a shopping mall in Brisbane and knocked over 3 dozen eggs, and just creating havoc, and that's the headline on the 6 o'clock news. But
it must be the red, huh, Mark?
Exactly. Yeah. But what's happening is that then they give these ads, and these people are seeing these ads. Say, oh, do you feel depressed? Do you feel sad? Do you feel this? Tell your doctor to prescribe blah blah blah, and this will make you feel blah blah blah. And so the people are getting their information on drugs from a TV commercial, right. and it's making them go back to their doctor and say, hey, I just saw that I want this drug because this commercial says it's going to make me feel better. Sleep better, have sex better, whatever you want to say better. And that's, it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be that the people who could afford to advertise their drug get their drug sold, because that creates like pressure on the physician to write for this drug they don't even know anything about. So it's overall it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing unless you can get every single side equal time to advertise their product, which they can't, right? So that creates the problem.
Well, we're one of only 2 countries that even allow pharmaceuticals to be advertised. Us and I think Australia are the only 2 countries in the world where that's even allowed.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah. And there's a very good reason for that. You know, it's supposed to be your doctor telling you, we're giving you this drug because there is clinical evidence. There's randomized clinical trials that says that this is a good drug for you to take, not because some guy at 3 a.m, you know, showing his little happy face bouncing around. You could be him.
Well, there are 2 drugs I see advertised that mention as a possible side effect this weird autoimmune disorder that I came across about 8 years ago called Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Yes.
And I got it through food poisoning, but apparently it can be also triggered by medications as well.
Yeah.
And it's a nasty, nasty damn thing to have to go through. I had a really bad case of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, you could
put
stop
me in
breathing.
A nursing facility. Well, put me in a nursing facility in a wheelchair for 1.5 years.
Wow.
And really out of commission for close to 2 years. And also I was a veritable quadriplegic for about 3 months or so.
Wow.
And before I could even start therapy. And for most of those 3 months, I was also experiencing severe hallucinations that grew increasingly paranoid. And I suffered an episode of heart failure during that time too, that put me in a hospital in critical condition. And somehow a DNR showed up on my chart. Don't know how that happened, but it ain't there now, that's for sure. But it was a very harrowing experience. But
and there you go. And somebody may have prescribed it to you because they saw an ad or they felt so they always talk about how do doctors get informed on new drugs, and the right way to be informed on new drugs is to read an article that talks about a randomized controlled trial looking at the drug, and then discussing it at different meetings, and having guidelines, you know, set down by doctors. Say, hey, this should be a guideline-directed drug. This is what we pick for this condition. It should not be an advertise on TV, and it should not be some drug rep come bubbling into your office. Hey, doctor, we got this new drug.
The attractive woman who shows up with the suitcase.
My mother was and this is kind of all been talked about. They've made shows about it and everything else. But my mother was a nurse and nurse practitioner, and from a very like this going back into the 70s, the drug reps would show up, and they'd show up with cookies. They would show up with candy. They would show up with, and it got to a point where they were showing up with football tickets to the game at the Arizona Cardinals, or the Cardinals football games, and so there was always that sort of pressure from drug reps coming in and just like, here, take this, take this, take this, take this.
Correct.
And I've seen shows on it and stuff.
And
like
they
that.
have data, prescribing data, where they could tell how many prescriptions you write, and they'll actually come in and say, hey, doctor, I've noticed you haven't written any prescriptions for us, and we've been giving your office donuts for the last 6 months. Right. And they'd be like, well, I didn't ask for donuts, so take a hike. So
what I want to ask you about a couple of so other than so you've explained that to me, but if you're a woman or a man who is 30 pounds or 40 pounds overweight, and you have the money, is that the drug that we're talking about, the Ozempic type of drugs? Is that something that if you talk to your doctor, so far seems to be a healthy way to lose weight?
I mean, you want to first try lifestyle, diet, exercise changes, because if you don't, but you want to try that first because here's the thing: if you don't adopt lifestyle changes, dietary changes, exercise, and all that, even if you do take the drug and lose a bunch of weight, guess what? When you stop the drug, you put the weight right back on again because you haven't corrected that. So the recommendation usually is you want to first, educate people and have them try a diet and lifestyle changes. Because you look at people's diets, I mean, the average,
horrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and it's funny. I was at a conference about a month ago, and Valentin Fuster, a very renowned cardiologist, scientist, edited many journals, many papers. He's at Mount Sinai in New York. He came out to Cedars Sinai to give a grand rounds, and he said, "When do you think the age to intervene in people in terms of their diet, in terms of their lifestyle? What age?" And it turns out, he said, age 3 to 8.
Yeah. Wow.
Because as kids, we get this ingraining of you're rewarded with candy, you're rewarded with ice cream, or hey, we're rewarded by getting a Big Mac, rewarded by getting, and so all these dietary choices and things which are considered quote unquote normal
3 to 5
get ingrained as children. So it's hard to untrain that, because when you get older, we always think about food as a reward, food as a crutch, And it's with so many people, it's so cultural. Like, I grew up Italian, so us, it's like, eating pasta every night was supposed to be a good thing.
More.
Exactly. And if you wait, my grandmother looked at me like, you're too skinny. Like, you had to be fat to be healthy. And that's the thing. And so you culturally grow up with this thing of like eating. So how do you unwrite that programming that's been written for such an early part in life? And I think a lot of that lifestyle and diet and choices that people just make without even thinking about it. I mean, a number of processed foods and these carbohydrates and simple sugars and fast foods and artificial sweeteners and sodas. People drink soda, which is like 30, 40 grams of sugar a can. I mean, all these things that people don't even think about. And the thing is like this, it's like it's 100 calories here, 100 calories there, at the end of the month, it's 5 pounds or 3 pounds or whatever.
Yeah.
So multiply it by years, there's your 40 pounds. I mean, people they've worked hard accumulating this body fat. It's like probably one of the few things that kind of grow up, not our savings accounts or annuities, but our body fat, if you don't watch yourselves.
Yeah.
Well, even those ads say you take these drugs in conjunction with lower calorie intake and increased exercise. Having gained and lost weight myself a lot through my lifetime, I lose weight when I decrease my calories, eat more healthy, fresh foods, and get more exercise. And it's always worked for me, and that's how I'm living now. Gaining weight for me was always kind of a function of drinking alcohol, and after having Guillain-Barré syndrome, I don't drink anymore.
Sorry to interrupt, Jim. Let me ask you a quick question, because you brought up alcohol. There was a period of time, it felt like for 20 years, where the knowledge behind alcohol was like, oh, it's not very good for you, but if you want a glass of red wine at night, you can always have, glass of red wine is actually good for you. So therefore people would, they'd have their 1 or 2 or 3, they'd end up splitting a bottle of red wine and then thinking, oh, well, this is good for me. This is good for us. Is that, can you talk on that at all? Is there any alcohol at any time that actually is beneficial?
It's funny, the alcohol story keeps changing. It changes as the wines change in the barrel over time. But they used to say, a little bit of red wine once in a while, like maybe 2 or 3 glasses a week. Might be good because of the tannins and the antioxidants. But there's a paper just circulating out recently saying maybe the red wine not so good because people drinking, because alcohol itself could be toxic to the heart, and maybe the tannins and the things in the red wine, the resveratrols, all that's the good stuff. And maybe if you can get that without the alcohol, you may be better off. And there are actually. You can buy resveratrol over the counter. You can buy some of the good stuff in wine without having the alcohol, because the alcohol itself might be toxic.
Yeah, I was in your office recently, and there was a period of time when I was taking HGH, the human growth hormone, and this was 10 years ago or something like that. There's actually, he's got it. I've showed it on this podcast before, a picture of me on that stuff. And I that was expensive back then. And I had a lot of money, and I still thought, like, wow, this is very expensive. I mentioned that to you in your office just kind of offhandedly, and your face kind of frowned. Is that, can you talk to me about HGH?
It's tricky when you're trying to replace hormones. A lot of people are looking to replace hormones without having a well supervised method. HGH, is kind of an upstream hormone, and that actually produces a lot of other hormones. And the problem with HGH is that it can cause enlargement of the heart. It can cause enlargement of the prostate. It can cause it could affect your lipids, your fat metabolism. So there's all these potentially harmful effects by using HGH, especially a lot of people take HGH in a very unregulated or lightly supervised way, because there's people prescribing them. They're kind of the end point is, hey, your muscles got bigger, you feel good, and it's like you're turning on things. You have to be careful. There's a condition called acromegaly, where people have too much HGH, and you see people with remember Richard Kiel, the actor that played Jaws.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a guy with too much HGH, right? That's genetically, he makes too much. His pituitary made too much, and that's what he looked like, right? So people that have that will have heart problems, blood pressure problems, and don't tend to live as long. So the danger of when you're giving a hormone like that's an upstream hormone that turns on so many things is how do we regulate? How do we monitor? Because you can get enlargement of the heart, you can get enlargement of other things which you may not necessarily want to be enlarged. And then as you come down, there's things like testosterone, which that just supplementing testosterone in people that have low testosterone, where you're supplementing it in therapeutic range, can be beneficial. And actually, some studies with the heart and cardiovascular disease, it shows that supplementing testosterone in men in a controlled way, where you keep it within range, because some guys are like, I want my testosterone level to be 2,000, and they want to punch through walls or something. I don't know.
Fuck all right.
Yeah. So that's dangerous too. So these have to be supervised and regulated and controlled, because there are consequences to giving hormones. Look how big Barry Bonds got.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
But is there a difference between steroids and we were talking about HGH, and we were talking about you just brought up what? Testosterone. There's a difference between what Barry Bonds was doing and what all those baseball players were doing back in the day. I mean, what's the difference between that and steroids?
There's different kinds. I mean, the steroids. A lot of bodybuilders were talking about, with some of these things called Winstrol and things like that. These bodybuilding things which stimulate muscle growth. And these are all things which trigger growth hormone. But basically, we're talking about hormones. I mean, steroids are hormones, basically, and there's the natural ones and the ones that try to trigger the natural ones. You got to also remember, too, you could also trigger diabetes. Okay. So there's consequences to turning everything up, so to speak.
Okay.
And that's why they have to be regulated. And a lot of places that clinics and rejuvenation clinics, stay young clinics, they just kind of, people get them shipped in from Canada or from Mexico, whatever, and they're shooting up in the bathroom or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of there's problems with that, obviously. So you have to be careful.
What about, this is I think a much lesser situation, but I'd heard about it for a long time, and I'm fit. I like to go to the gym, and hey, if I can eat something or drink something that's going to make me feel better or look better, what's creatine?
So creatine is a supplement people take. It's an interesting story, because there's a story that Sammy Sosa took a lot of creatine. That's how he got the bulk up and hit all those home runs. And some of the concerns was that having too much creatine in your system could be potentially harmful to your kidneys, harmful to your system. the more recent studies that kind of looked at thousands of patients are showing that if you take a reasonable amount of creatine, it could actually help with your muscles, help you maintain muscle mass. Because as we get older, there's something called sarcopenia. I mean, we lose muscle mass as we get older, and perhaps exercising and using small doses of creatine can potentially help attenuate that, make that less. So once again, it's moderation and supervision. Watch your kidney function. Check, make sure that you're not overdoing it. But that seems to be less harmful in smaller doses. And there's also stories of people taking a lot, and having kidney issues, but that's taking many grams. But I think it's safe doses. You could be okay.
Okay. I could listen to you for days on end myself, and I think I'm like most people. Jim, I'm sure that you have been enlightened and found the conversation interesting. And Jennifer,
absolutely.
Jennifer had given me the idea that you might be open. I'm just going to do this on while we're in the air. You can cut the end of this off. But Jennifer gave me the idea that in the future, if you had time, when you had time, or if you had time, or kind of around these holidays or whatever, not these holidays, but in the future, that you'd be willing to come back and come back and talk to us more, where we would have maybe more specific questions for, people out there that, you could help. I mean, I don't want to turn you in Dr. Phil or all those Dr. Drew or any of those fucking kind of it.
I'd like to talk to you about some of your movie stuff too.
Yeah, sure.
You were in a movie. You're in a recent movie based on the old song "Wildfire" about the horse.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember that song. Yeah. Wildfire. Yeah, for sure.
So I guess I just hope that at some point we can get you back.
I'd love to.
And you're also Italian. You came from New York, and all the stories and all the people that you know and all the actors that you know. And I can't go into your office. I cannot go into your office without running into a director, an actor that I've worked with, a director who's not hired me. And every time I'm in there, I run into somebody. So, and I know that you've got a lot of friends in the business. And another thing that you should be aware of is, and I'll just kind of end it with this, is that we're small. We're just starting. I've done 15 of these. Bill Burr's done like 1,500 of them. And so it takes time for us to grow. So I want you to be aware of that, because what happens always immediately is you want to look. You want to look at your numbers and then compare them to another guest. But other guests have television shows. Other guests have got their
fan base.
They're fan base.
Yeah,
they got a fan. Yeah, they got a fan base, and I don't think that you have a fan. I mean, you got a fan base with me, and you got
a fan base where it matters.
So I don't want you to be disappointed, because it can happen where somebody might be getting 5,000 looks, and somebody else might be getting 500 looks. But the people that are getting 5,000 looks have been in loads and loads of movies, and loads of television, and loads of sports, or they've got hit songs, or they've got books that they've written, and so I want you to be aware of that, because
so we have to write a song then. That's trying to tell me.
That's right. But I hope you can come back. I hope you can do this again.
I'd love to.
Okay.
I'd love to,
all right. Yeah. Good. All right. All right. Well, this is about where. Well, thank you for coming. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Jim.
Yeah, it was great speaking.
Yeah, thank you. I have a little problem saying it's over. Cut. That's it. It's over. I know that when I do podcasts, when people say, "Okay, well, I think we're just about out of time," it's always sort of deflating for me. I always kind of feel like, I guess they're not interested in me anymore. All right. Goodbye, and thank you, Rico, so much for coming in.
Thank you.
I know how important your time is.